Hello, Amber here, and welcome back. Today I'm joined by my good friend Tracy, and we will be discussing The Hedge Knight, a novella written by George R.R. Martin. It is a simple but elegant story about hidden identity, earning your role, and the code of knighthood. The story takes place in 209 AC, some 90 years before the events in A Song of Ice and Fire. It tells the tale of Dunk and how he took the role of a hedge knight, meets a squire, a young boy named Egg, and competes in the Ashford Meadow tourney. Any place you would like to start off, Tracy? Maybe the beginning.
The beginning is good. The beginning is usually a very good place to start. Yeah.
The loss of Sir Arlen of Pennytree.
Right out the gate, someone's
Right
dead.
out the gate.
It feels very Game of Thronesy. Like,
Yeah.
Dealing with loss immediately.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a good tool. This is a big impetus in where he takes this story for this young knight, and while he's like pushes forward with his journey, it's the knight's words that we like kind of hear in his head as he's like doing certain things and making certain choices.
I think the first thing that I recognize about Dunk, and he's burying poor Arlen of Pennytree, they had been riding in the wind and rain, and he catches a chill and he dies. So he's burying this, what it seems like this very frail older man, and this is pretty much the only father that Dunk has ever known because he was an orphan in King's Landing. And I loved this little tribute, this eulogy he gives him. And I think it really speaks to his maturity for such a young man because he's like 16, 17
He's
or
16.
something like this.
Yeah.
And I thought it was really sweet. And then we have this, he's almost a bit impish as well because he's like, saying these words, and he's like, except for that one time when you scolded me and I was in trouble for doing this, and it really wasn't me who did it, but it doesn't matter.
But I guess that's
and
okay.
But of course it matters because he's bringing this up. So I think starting out the story on this topic of honor, and Dunk has a very strong sense of what is right and what is wrong and what is just. And I like that. It's so simple for George R.R. Martin to come out the bat with just such a short story, but it is so impactful in such a short amount of time, where A Song of Ice and Fire is like wordy and very long. And this is just like boom, boom, hitting the beats. And you're getting the most important details.
I think I struggle a little bit with the age of Dunk. He just feels too young to me. Like, just even a few years older, and I would have, like, I don't know, for me, I just kind of struggle when it's like, these people are so young, and I'm like, why? Why are they so young? Like, it makes it harder for me to believe that a 16-year-old behaves this way. I had a 16-year-old son, and I mean, like, we had talked about this yesterday, and you had mentioned something about, like, this possibly being a callback to, like, a medieval lifestyle and setting that like George R.R. Martin likes to use. And in that case, then he's like middle-aged at 16.
Yeah.
So that makes far more sense. But sometimes I struggle with that a little bit. Like Jordan does the same thing in The Wheel of Time. Really young characters. And I'm like, just age them up just a few years, just a couple.
Yeah, and what you're saying about it being like he's almost middle-aged here, you're not wrong because, I mean, obviously for this whole episode, spoilers, if you haven't read the book, you probably don't want to watch this. But when we get to the end of this story, the man who was killed at the end is 39. So like,
oh wow, yeah, Half-Life.
and he's like in his prime, like this is. Yeah, age. But I think too, with mostly all of George R.R. Martin's, especially in A Song of Ice and Fire, like Jon Snow, he's a child. I mean, the Stark children are children.
Our children.
Danny
Mm-hmm.
Danny is a young girl. So I mean, yeah,
Yes.
this fits with everything else that he's done so far.
That's true. I am not as familiar with George R. R. Martin's work as you are. Um, and so for me, I wasn't necessarily aware that this kind of like fits with the trend of like how he writes his stuff. So thanks. That
Yeah,
is helpful to
yeah.
know. It really is. Yeah.
HBO aged them up a little bit. So I mean, yeah, it's different from book to show, but I
Mm-hmm.
think
Yeah.
too I can see Dunk so easily in my mind's eye, like what this man looks like. An egg,
Mm-hmm.
especially. The
Oh my gosh.
illustrations in this book are
So good.
amazing.
So good.
Amazing.
They're
I mean, I have
just
a favorite, like hands down. My favorite
okay.
is when little Aegon is rushing to go get Dunk because Tansella is being assaulted and he's
Okay.
like
Mm-hmm.
revealing himself and it is this little like him standing
Oh
there
yeah. Yes.
so resolute and he's like revealing who
I'm
he
trying.
is, but I'm getting ahead of myself.
Yeah.
I love how these illustrations in this book go with the story and it's so sweet in a way that
It
some
is.
of George R. R. Martin's other works are not.
So okay, because I want to get back to like Dunk and Egg and like them meeting.
Yeah.
So we have like we start out with Dunk and he is burying his mentor, his father figure. And
Hmm.
age, he comments that he's like 50 to 60 years old. So not a bad life, good long life for a hedge knight in particular.
Hmm.
But now Dunk is on his own and he makes his choices, what comes with him, where does he go? And he makes this decision. It's the Ashford tourney for him. He's gonna prove
Try his hand.
himself. That's
Yeah.
right. He has a plan. I really admire that he like comes up with this plan where he's like, I'm gonna be the best that I can be at this tourney, and I'm going to be brought into a noble house and become a real knight. Like, this is his plan. And he thinks about other things, but he eventually just like always narrows in, this is my plan, this is my focus, this is where I need to be. So
Yeah.
in this, he stops at an
And
inn
in. Hmm.
and he's like, I have enough money for food. Huzzah. And I'm like,
Yeah.
man, that's got to feel good.
Right?
I mean, that's probably not always the case, you know? Like, I think he said it had been 6 months since he had last eaten in an inn. And I was like, wow, it's a long time to go without
Yeah.
a decent meal, you know? But when he gets to the inn, there's this little scamp that
Rascal.
comes running up naked,
He's he's so
covered in
sweet. I
mud,
love it. I love
bald.
it. Yes.
He's just this absurd looking little child. And of
Hmm.
course, Dunk is like, you must be the stable boy. You
Yeah.
know, like, did you know, like, when you first read this, did you already know that little egg was going to be more than this naked, dirty child running amok?
So, yeah, I had a pretty good feeling, but I think George R. R. Martin so often uses like obscured identity in his story. It
Mm-hmm.
is all over the place. I mean, Jon Snow is a big one. I mean, it's
Yes.
everywhere in A Song of Ice and
Mm-hmm.
Fire. Someone always has potential to be a secret Targaryen.
Prince.
And,
Yeah.
right. And this little boy, he's just too witty and charming, and you know he's important. And then
Mm-hmm.
on top of meeting him at the inn, I think he's like, oh, you must be the stable boy, like, tend to my horse, this and that. And
Mm-hmm.
he's really impressed with, I think, Egg because
Mm-hmm.
he's a hard little worker. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so we meet him, and then we also meet Darren, who is
Mm-hmm.
Egg's brother. And
Mm-hmm.
he is not realizing, of course, that he's a prince, but he's just this drunkard. And when
Mm-hmm.
Dunk encounters him, Darren is like, you! And he's all like, and I've seen you in my
I
dreams.
dreamt of you. Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And Dunk's like, all right, like someone's had enough to drink now. And so we resume this later on in the story. But
Mm-hmm.
another thing that is used so often in George R. R. Martin's stories is prophecy and
Mm-hmm.
people who have dragon dreaming. So, kind
Yes.
of like
Yeah.
within
Yeah.
many other fantasy stories where someone can
Mm-hmm.
foresee the future. And
Mm-hmm.
Darren is one of these lucky few. And it's not luck. I mean, he's
I was gonna say.
obviously not dealing with it very well,
Mm-mm.
but
No. 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 Poor guy. So Dunk hangs out, has a fine meal, drinks enough ale that he's feeling a little fuzzy headed,
mhm.
goes back to the stable because he needs his horses and his gear, and little Egg is playing dress up. Has like
It,
all the all the gear on. Yes, this image, like this image in the book, this illustration was probably like one of my favorites where he's like where Dunk comes in and sees him like on the horse. And instead
yes,
of like getting upset with him, he laughs. And I liked that a lot. I feel like it's very telling about who Dunk is as a character. Like there's a lot of him
yeah,
being like, "Oh, or I'll clout your ear" or something like that, but usually
yeah.
he like ends up being kind of gentle and caring, and I think that that's I
He's
think that's
really fair.
nice.
He's really fair. I mean, he
Yes.
can be stern,
Yeah.
but fair about it. And I think this is
Yeah.
carrying on from what he learned from Sir Arlen. And
Mhm.
I love like the passing down of mentors, I guess, in
Yes.
a story like
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. I think the illustration that I marked out as my favorite though is on the very next page because I feel like this kind of sums up what their relationship is going to be like where
It's really cute. Hmm.
like this is little Arthur. This is little Arthur. Like I can see this child so easily because my kid is like this, like little like he's a little scamp. I mean, that's just the way Arthur is. He gets into everything. He always wants to do the thing. And then when he chooses it, he sets his mind to it. So I just like
Yeah. You get the sense that Egg is running away from something, and
mhm.
things
Mhm.
in his family are not great despite, being a prince. And
Mhm. Yeah, and he asks Dunk to take him with him. He's like, "Take me. You need a squire." And he's like, I think he says, "Every knight needs a squire. You look as though you need one more than most." And so he makes this plea, "Take me with you." He doesn't have a mom. Like,
mhm,
just take
which is
me.
true.
Uh, which is true. Like when you look through it, like everything that Egg tells Dunk is true.
Yeah.
It's just not all of the truth.
So when Dunk asks him, like, where's your mother? Or he goes, are you an orphan? He's like, my mother is dead. And before he can finish off answering Dunk's questions, little Egg is like, are you an orphan too? And like he
Ooh,
switches
yeah.
it up on him. And so he's
Mhm.
really fast. He's a fast thinker. And I like that
Mhm.
for such a little guy. But
Yeah, I
we
agree.
move we move forward and Dunk has to make this really tough decision. So he needs armor to
Mhm.
go into this tournament. So he has to sell his horse, but he is also lacking proof of his knighthood. And this gets him
Yes.
nearly
Yes.
barred from the competition. So he's got
Mhm.
two problems now. He sells one of the horses so he can afford the things that he needs.
Mhm.
And then we have Prince Balar, who
Mhm.
essentially vouches for him later. And I
Mhm.
really love how Dunk kind of like stumbles into this conversation with Prince
Yeah.
Baylor because they're talking about Egg and Damon and how they can't find Egg. And Dunk
Yes.
has no idea what that has to do with anything, but he's like, oh
Yeah.
no, like I've intruded. And
Yeah.
he gets what he needs. Now, I had a question for you. So,
Sure.
do you think that Dunk was actually knighted? Do you think he's a real knight?
Based on his behaviors, I I landed on yes. Cuz
Okay.
I asked myself that same question when I was reading it. I was like, are you lying so that you can be in this tourney? I landed on him being honest because I
Okay.
just don't see, based on his character so far and then moving forward, I don't see him being the kind of person who would base his entire existence on a lie. You're
Would you
smiling
like to
so
know?
big.
He's
Did
lying.
he
Lie,
lie?
liar, liar, pants on fire.
Oh no.
There's a
Dunk, I'm
couple of,
so disappointed.
yeah, there's a couple of clues, but the big one I think is when Sir Raymond, the squire for Stefan Fossaway, is like, "I'll join you. I'll be in your on your team for the trial.
Mm-hmm.
Knight me, knight me." Dunk
Mm-hmm.
won't do it because he's not a knight. He's not a real knight, so he can't knight another knight, and he makes an excuse
Oh.
and he won't do it. There's a few other ones, but like
Huh.
he's not, but I think this is really interesting because it's such
Man.
a it's a like a moral quandary because he's not, it's like spirit of the law versus letter of the law. So
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
he takes his vows very, very seriously, but at the same
Mm-hmm.
time, he's the knight that knights should be. And I think with this
Mm-hmm.
story, a lot of there's a big theme around who makes the rules and like why
Mm-hmm.
are they allowed to? And with Dunk, he's from such a humble beginning, he doesn't have another option. So he's like, I have to do this. How am I going to survive? This is the only thing I know how to do. And we see
Yeah.
that in the beginning of the story when Sir Arlen dies, and he's like, well, I could do this. No, like all I've ever known is the life of a hedge knight. Like there's nothing else
Mm-hmm.
for me out there. So I have to continue on and do this. And so often with how he behaves is the question is being knighted matter? Like, does it mean anything as long as you
Yeah.
follow the code? So, like, I think
Mm-hmm.
that's one of the big themes of the story.
Mm-hmm.
But I love how at every turn he's kind of faced with this moral decision of like, do I step in and do something
Mm-hmm.
even when it's going to be like a huge disadvantage for me, or do I do what's right?
Mm-hmm. Hmm.
And
Hmm.
he usually is choosing to do what's right. And he's a very fun character. It's something much different than what we see in Fire and Blood and House of the
Mm-hmm.
Dragon. Like these two
Mm-hmm.
stories are very, very different. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
there's still crossover themes, but when we're looking at the
Yes.
main characters, it's a big difference. It's a big
Mm-hmm.
difference.
It really is. I am surprised. I mean, that's a good thing. I love to be surprised. But I sat and I asked myself that question just based off of like the little bit that like has been revealed about Dunk as a character. I was like, he can't be lying. Like he wouldn't lie about this.
Yes.
What a liar lie face. Lying lie
Yeah.
face. Come on now.
There's a
Mildly
lot of
disappointed, but that's okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of really cool callbacks to this story in A Song of Ice and Fire, but when we get there, I'll point a couple out if I remember to.
Cool. Yeah,
But
when that moment happened where he was like, I'm not going to knight this one guy, I just kind of figured that like he really felt pulled away by something more important than that, you know? Like that was what I took from that.
oh,
Huh. Ha.
that's typical George. I mean, you have to like look at his writing so closely sometimes, and I think that's one of the big things that I like about it is because so often you'll skip right over something. Like if you're not like
Mhm.
honed in looking for it, then it's just like,
Mhm.
hmm,
Yep, it's just part of the moment. It just
Yep.
slips away. Huh, neat. I like it. So Dunk
Let's see.
lies about being a knight.
Yes. He goes ahead and watches the competition with the commoners, which I really love, with
Mm-hmm.
egg on his shoulders and, they're
So
cheering
cute.
and watching. And we have like a couple tilts, and then like the big one ends with Prince Aerion. And
Mm-hmm.
this guy is the worst. He's awful. Hate him.
Yeah, yeah.
He disgraces himself and kills Sir Humphrey Harding's horse on purpose. And with the tournament rules, that means that Sir Humphrey Harding is crowned or is called the winner of that joust, and he gets Arion's horse. So
Yeah,
that
yeah.
moves over to
Because that
him.
that was one of the things about the tourney that I thought was really interesting because I mean I don't know tourney rules, and the fact that you would have to relinquish your horse, your armor, your sword. Is it your sword too? Like it's pretty
I
much
think so.
everything you need to be a knight. And then
Mm-hmm.
you have to ransom it back from the guy who won it from you. And I
Yeah.
was like, "Oh, oh,
Yeah.
like I wasn't expecting that as a cost of entering the tourney." And so
Yeah.
I was like, Dunk loses everything if he loses one round. He
The
loses
stakes
everything.
the stakes couldn't be higher for him. I mean,
Truth,
it's
truth.
do or die. And it makes
Yeah.
that lie, I mean, worth a lot.
Yeah,
Like,
like almost more than being knighted. And so like
yeah.
seeing the competition and what it's willing to do to win, quote unquote, because I
Hmm.
mean, he didn't win. Like that was that was unsportsmanlike of him, and so he didn't
Right.
like the prince didn't win. But still like this is how far like some people are probably going to be willing to go to win. So Dunk has this
Yeah.
like exposure to unscrupulous behavior among men
Yes.
who are knighted. And I think that that
Yes.
is important to show. And I like how it gets shown in this, like, kind of, I want to say bombastic, but I don't know if that's the right word. Like just thinking about the fall of the horse and the blood splurting and the sound of the screaming and
Hmm.
like I don't know, it was intense and it was cool and I liked that part.
Yeah, yeah, I loved it too. I mean, I keep saying that this story, these novellas are a little bit more wholesome than things from A Song of Ice and Fire and maybe
Yeah,
Fire and Blood. But at the same time, like there's no shortage of brutal, gory bloodshed, which is like so George R. R.
true.
Martin. But I think
I
that's
was gonna
why this
say
stands out so
staple.
much. Yeah, because
Yeah,
it's a little bit more well-rounded, I think, and compact and
yeah,
condensed and more accessible, maybe. But
yeah. And I mean, up till like that point, everything's kind of like do do do. Here we go along in a story, and then it was like, there we
mhm.
go. There's the bloodshed I was looking for.
Yeah,
I was looking for that. You know.
it's giving us the immediate villain. So like Prince
Mm-hmm.
Arion is incredibly cruel. So like right off the bat, we're like, okay, that guy. Got it.
This also seems to be a trend that Martin writes of is just these incredibly cruel individuals. Like
Hmm.
depths
Joffrey.
of the pit of hell bad.
Yeah.
Ramsay Bolton.
Yeah.
You know, like these are bad people. He does not hold any punches back sometimes in how villainous the villains are. And
Yeah,
that's kind of fun.
absolutely. I
Yeah.
think he writes some of the best villains ever. And on top of that, some of my favorite morally gray characters, like the
Ooh,
Hound.
yeah.
I mean, like,
Mm-hmm.
his characters are so much fun, but okay, I could go on and on.
You know, at some point, maybe we'll just sit down and I'll let you. You can just like Amber's favorite
Rant.
morally gray
Let's go.
characters. I'll sit for
So
it.
so we move to that night, and Egg informs Dunk that this puppeteer woman, Tansel or Tansella, however you want to say it, he had met earlier, is being beaten by Prince Aerion. No surprise
What
there.
a
Aerion
dick!
is awful.
He's terrible.
And Dunk, true to his morals, just like leaps up, comes in, and strikes the guy in his face.
Yep.
And I love this moment so much. Like, it is I marked the page here. So, like, Tansella is pleading and crying, and he twists her arm and bends her fingers backwards so they break. And she's a puppeteer, like, she needs
She's a
her fingers.
puppeteer.
And it says Dunk stood there stupidly, not quite believing what he saw, that he heard a crack, and Tansella screamed. One of Arion's men tried to grab him and went flying. 3 long strides, and Dunk grabbed the prince's shoulders and wrenched him around hard. The sword and dagger were forgotten, along with everything the old man had ever taught him. His fist knocked Aerion off of his feet, and the toe of his boot slammed into the prince's belly. When Aerion went for his knife, Dunk stepped on his wrist and kicked him again right in the mouth. He might have kicked him to death right then and there, but the princeling's men swarmed over him. And like, he did not hold back. He did not hold back at
Mm-mm.
all. I mean, okay,
Mm-mm.
he's a very large man. He probably could have
Mm-hmm.
done more damage, but at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, it's a prince. And
Mm-hmm.
what I love in this moment is just like the chaos where I can so
Mm-hmm.
easily in my head see this very large young man just like bulldozing his way through this crowd and like throwing people off of him and picking up this
Yes.
prince and just like whipping him around. And this is
Mm-hmm.
not this is not like a morally just character. And Dunk, even though he's not a real knight, he's taking these
Mm-hmm.
vows very seriously to protect people
Mm-hmm.
who need protecting. And I love
Yes.
that for him.
Mm-hmm. Sorry. it doesn't it doesn't hurt that the prince is like going after Dunk's crush, you know?
Right,
Like,
right.
and we've been getting how he like finds her attractive and he keeps coming back to like watch her in the puppet show and
Tansella too
she's
tall. He's like, you're not too tall for, he wants to
for
say
me.
me, but he's like, for
Yeah.
puppets. For puppets.
Okay.
So cute.
It's cute. He steps into to protect her in a way that no one else was going to and no one else had. Like, this
Hmm.
is exactly what a knight is supposed to do. And even though this prince is also a knight, I'm assuming, or wouldn't be able to be in the tourney, is behaving in so far the opposite direction of how a knight is supposed to behave. And so I can see him kind of like losing his shit on several different like
Hmm.
levels and then just I mean, how many men does it take
I
before
don't
he's
think it's
finally subdued?
I don't think it
It's just
says
like
how many. It's
it
just like the princeling's men.
yeah,
So,
and like swarmed. Swarmed. They had to
yeah.
swarm over him to get him to
Hmm.
stop, which I think shows pretty good odds for him being able to be successful in the
Right.
tourney. Like,
But
is this our first time seeing him fight?
yeah.
Is when
Yeah.
this happens? Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Like up till then, it's like, well, maybe he's just a big guy and can't brawl. But then you're like, oh, he's a brawler. Got it. He's going to
Yep.
probably be fine.
Yeah. Oh, we'll get to that when we get to the trial by 7, which
Oh my
okay,
gosh.
that's probably my favorite. So, let's see here. Dunk is jailed. He chooses trial by combat rather than losing his hand.
Mm-hmm.
Aerion demands combat to be trial of the 7 so that his brother, Prince Darren, who also accused Dunk of kidnapping Egg, like this is getting
Right?
so messy.
Liar.
So he's really ganged up on by these 2 princes, and he doesn't stand a chance.
Mm-hmm.
He's got to
Mm-hmm.
find 6 companions, 6 champions who will fight with him to go up against seven of the prince's men.
Mhm.
So the
Mhm.
next question is finding allies for Dunk. And he's kind of
Yeah.
befriended this man, Stefan Fossaway, who,
Mhm.
again, like, very interesting character. So Stefan
Mhm.
Fossaway is like, oh, like, I promise I'm going to come back with six. It'll be seven of us, and we're going to do this. And Stefan's
Mhm.
cousin, Raymond, who is the squire that
Mhm.
Dunk wouldn't knight, comes
Mhm.
along and he's joining in on this Easter egg hunt.
Mhm. Mhm.
So we also have Egg, who is like, I promise I'm going to bring you a champion too, Dunk. And Raymond
Well,
returns.
this is post egg reveal, right? Like now
Yes,
Dunk
yes.
knows who Egg is. So he actually at least has a prince on his side too, which is
Hmm.
kind of about the only balance he has in this
Yeah.
entire situation. He doesn't know anyone. The one night that he might have been able to like ask for help is already like the guy who knew him that could have vouched
Hmm.
for him being a knight from the other guy, like he's already been like, I have no time for you. So who is he going
Right.
to ask? This poor guy. This poor guy. Like,
Yeah.
this seems excessively cruel on
Hmm.
Prince Aerion's
I think
like.
this is exactly why. Like, he knew
Mm-hmm.
that this
Mm-hmm.
humble man from Flea Bottom, he doesn't know anyone. He was barely
Mm-mm.
even recognized as a knight. So, like, he's not
Mm-hmm.
going to find anyone. And it just so happens that this big kerfluffle with Tansella needing defended, he's really sparked the admiration of the common people in the
Mm-hmm.
silken town where everyone is camped
Mm-hmm.
out for the festivities. And like my heart, like he gets his seven. Something
Mm-hmm.
else, barely, barely. But I
Barely.
loved how before everything happens, like women are kind of like kissing him on his cheek, and people are kind of like cheering him
Cheering
on
him.
because he stood
Yes.
up for the common person, for this poor woman
Mm-hmm.
against this cruel prince. And it's like, oh, Dunk. I just love this guy
Yes.
so much.
Mm-hmm.
So let's see, we have his seven: Sir Humphrey Harding, Sir Humphrey Beesbury, and we've got Sir Robin Riesling, Sir Lionel Baratheon, the Laughing Storm. And these two are both
I love
eager
that
for,
name.
yes, eager for glory. Stefan Fossoway returns, and then we get like
Mm,
the uh-oh moment where he's like, sorry, you
I knew
actually.
that guy was gonna like knew it.
Yes. Yes,
What a dick.
treachery. He said he's decided to fight for the accusers, and it is because he was offered a lordship.
Mm-hmm.
So Raymond, who is the cousin of Sir Stephen Fossaway, this is when he begs to be knighted and
Mm-hmm.
take place for Stefan. Dunk hesitates, and he's called away by Lord Ashford. So Lionel actually grants Raymond his knighthood, and
Mm-hmm.
Dunk is still in need of a seventh. And this part like broke my
Mm,
heart, where he's looking out to the crowd and he's like, you, sir, like, I know you from this place. And every person that he's calling out to is refusing to make eye contact with him, or kind of like
yep.
laughing and turning aside. And he makes
Yep.
this final plea, and he's like, are there no true knights among you? And I'm like, kill me.
Right. And you
Typical
know what?
George
For
R. R.
him,
Martin, like, ugh, knife in the heart.
yes. And I feel like for Dunk, this has got to be like almost the ultimate level of discouragement and disappointment among what knights are expected to be. Like there's
Hmm.
even a moment earlier where he's mistaken as a stable boy. I think it is by Prince Aaron who makes that mistake. And he's like, I'm actually a knight. And he's like, oh, knighthood has fallen down, like if you're a knight. But yet here this man who behaved as a knight should, protected the weak, defended the helpless, is talking to a whole slew of other knights who have taken these same vows, although I guess not really. Um, but none of them will step up. None of them will do what feels right. Like they're all
Hmm.
too comfortable. And I mean, I don't know. Like this is to the death. This
Hmm.
isn't this isn't like if someone gets tapped by the tip of someone's sword, it's fine, that person's out. This is to the death. Like
Yeah.
or to draw. Like can they make that choice where they can choose to like
They can tap out. They can say
okay.
like, okay, like we quit. He
Mhm.
wins,
Okay.
which
Okay. All right.
yeah.
Cuz that
But Dunk can't. I mean, he could, but then he'll be killed. So,
he'll be killed. Yeah.
yeah.
So they could surrender. His side really doesn't have the option of being
Mm-mm.
able to surrender. So yeah,
No.
tough choices, but still
Yeah.
expectation versus reality. Disappointing.
Yeah. And then we have the big like the curtain drops, and Prince Baelor Targaryen, who is actually the heir. He
Mhm.
comes up and he's like, okay, I'll fight. But the problem with Baylor is that he did not intend on jousting at this tournament.
Mhm.
So he doesn't have his own armor. So he's using borrowed armor.
Mhm.
And that is very important to the story. So then we have this big moment where we have the 14 champions lined up on their mounts and they're on opposite
Mhm.
sides. And we have Team Dunk who have decided to use tourney lances instead of
Mhm.
real lances, war lances, because they are longer, with the
Mhm.
idea that if they can make contact first and unhorse the opponent first, then they stand a better
Mhm.
chance, even though that the other side is using war lances. So if they get hit, they're probably toast. But it's another risk that we
Mhm.
see our protagonists have to take amongst all of the other.
The illustration's fun too. I hadn't noticed this until I just looked more closely. The lances are taller, even in the
Yeah.
illustration. Well done,
Hmm.
illustrator.
Yeah. So we have Dunk tilting against Aerion, the big baddie of this story. And poor
Mhm.
Dunk is very quickly unhorsed and he is nearly defeated. And then we get Dunk from Flea Bottom. And I love this
Mhm.
moment so much because all of his nightly training just goes out the window. He is back on the
Yep.
streets of Flea Bottom and he is brawling like a street fighter. And
Mhm.
I love this. It's like scraping and kicking, and there is a cost to this. It is not just
Mhm.
like, oh, you unhorsed me, and then they, fight with swords. This is like down in the mud, kicking and
Yep.
scraping.
Maces and everything too,
Hmm.
like shields being brought in as a weapon to like hit your opponent with, which oh my god,
Yeah.
cannot possibly feel good. But like you said, I love this line in the book where he says he could vanquish Sir Duncan the Tall, but not Dunk a flea bottom.
Yeah.
Little flea bottom brawler.
Yeah. So there is a lot of attention given to his shield in this story
Mhm.
and how
Mhm.
he can't take the sigil of Sir Arlen, so he needs to find his own. And that's what he has
Mhm.
made plans with Tansella. She's going to paint him a sigil, and it is a tree with the background of a red sky and a falling star. And
Mhm.
that shield actually comes back up in A Song of Ice and Fire. Brienne of Tarth knows this shield from her childhood. And one of the fun things about Brienne of Tarth, who is a very, very large woman, she's actually possibly related to Dunk, like a descendant from
What?
him. Yeah.
Aw, that's fun. I love
Yeah.
that.
I love that
Yeah,
too. I really like Brienne as a character. But I mean,
exactly.
they're so similar in their morals, even. Like, she
I was
is
just gonna
very
say.
determined and honor is very important to her. But even their fighting styles, like when Brienne is fighting for Renly to become one of
Mm-hmm.
his knights. She faces off against the Knight of Flowers, and she basically does the same number that Dunk does, like just brawls down in the dirt. And I
Mm-hmm.
think she even uses a shield as well to knock him around. But it's very similar to how this fight goes down, and Dunk manages to take Arion's shield from him and just beat him senseless with it. And
Mm-hmm.
Dunk doesn't even really remember what happened. Like he kind of just blacks out because he has been royally just like pummeled.
Mm-hmm.
He's not doing too well. I mean, but there are others who are doing faring even worse. And
Mm-hmm.
we have Arian recanting his accusation and ending the trial. And we learn afterwards that the fighting has killed both of the Humphreys. And we have Prince Baylor, who has not brought his own armor, wearing his son's instead. He's having this conversation with Dunk, and Dunk is very concerned about the outcome of the men who are fighting with them and what their health is. And
Mm-hmm.
again, like it just speaks to his care and how much honor he holds. And we have Baylor kind of slurring his words and acting a little drunkenly. And then we
Mm-hmm.
have Steely Pate removing Baylor's helm, and something wet falls out of the back, and it is part
I
of his skull, part of his brain.
loved it. Loved it. Loved it. Was like, went back and read it. I was like, wait, did part of his head just come out? What? That was fun. I thought that was like, I wasn't expecting this guy to die here, but of course
Mm-mm.
he does. We've got this
Yeah.
dream. We have a guy who feels good, who's like loved by the people. He's hand of the king. He's the
Mm-hmm.
heir. Like, this guy
He should have
dying?
been the king. So like now look at the
Mm-hmm.
other options out there who could sit on the Iron Throne.
Right. Not great. Not
Not great.
great. Oof. So yeah, like this, and I mean, of course, again, another George R. R. Martin kind of like thing that we should be expecting all the time is no one is really safe. And I kind
Hmm.
of, I mean, I think it's one of those things that I actually really appreciate about Game of Thrones. Like, it feels so much more realistic when your characters don't have like plot armor around them. And I like that.
Yeah,
I like that a lot. Like, just because they're good and like people love them doesn't mean that they get to survive everything.
right. And it's just, I mean, that's how history goes, right?
So true. So true.
It's
And I
not the
mean, just
fair and
because you're
just
evil,
that yeah.
exactly. Just because you're evil doesn't mean you don't get annihilated the way that you should be. Like, aren't these sons now like heirs to the throne for the Seven Kingdoms, right?
So on Egg's side at this time, like Egg and his brothers, not so much because they're not in the line right now
Mm-hmm.
as like at the beginning of this story. But I can tell you that even though Egg is I think I might be wrong. It's been a while since I've looked at the family trees and everything, but I think Egg is
Mm-hmm.
the fourth son of a fourth son. So he's called
Okay.
Egg the Unlikely, and he eventually
Okay.
does sit on the Iron Throne
Of
through
course.
a like wild, crazy happenstance where, yeah, a lot goes on
I'm
between this
assuming a
point.
lot of people die.
Yes, yes,
Cuz I mean, like Prince Aaron, he's the older brother, right, for
yes.
Egg and Darren.
He would be the oldest. So Arian, Darren,
Is that
Aemon,
right?
Egg. Aemon is
Okay,
not
yeah, cuz
here at the
fourth son.
tourney. Maester Aemon from the Maester from the Night's Watch in A Game
Yeah.
of Thrones, that's Egg's brother. So
I think, you know what?
do you remember when
Yes,
he
I
dies and
do.
he's like,
Mm-hmm.
Egg, I dreamed I
Egg,
was young.
egg. Ah! You know
Yeah.
what? That came to mind when I was reading this, and I was like, is it? Is it?
It
Like,
is.
I was
It
hoping
is.
that it would be. Because, I mean, it's 100 years before.
Yeah.
And
It's about
there's,
90-ish. Yeah.
yeah, and he like mentions just like how old he is. I mean, everybody knows
Hmm.
he's old, but I think he
Yeah.
eventually mentions like his actual age. And we were like, wow, you're really old.
Hmm.
So, yeah. Huh. Okay. Okay. That's cool.
So we have Dunk getting a proposition from Egg's father, and he says, I can take you into my personal guard. And Dunk is like, like, it's very kind of you, but I need to travel. And I could take Egg with me as a squire because he could be a better knight than Aerion. And Makar
Mm-hmm.
agrees to it. And then, like,
Mm-hmm.
this is the beginning of like these adventures with these two
Mm-hmm.
characters. And I love the ending where he's like, I hear they have good puppet shows in Dorne, and like off they go.
Off they go. Yeah,
Yeah.
as far as like a set 'em up kind of story, if you will,
Hmm.
this was really well done. I feel emotions for the people involved. Like I feel attached to some of the characters already. Like I feel
Hmm.
like that's almost like a gift, is being able to be like, here are these characters. Now feel about them. And I'm like, "Oh, I
Yes.
do. I actually do." That's fantastic. But even just like introducing, like if you haven't read A Song of Ice and Fire, you could still get this. You know,
Hmm.
this can completely stand alone on its own. It's fun to read familiar names and stuff from Game of Thrones, but I also think like enough gets explained
Hmm.
that you get an idea of like houses and the world that you live in and expectations for
Yeah.
people and whatnot. Like I just think it's really well done. And then like to still have more little stories come in after this, like it's
Yeah.
a great
Yeah.
let's set off for adventure. And even
Hmm.
the whole like Aegon is a prince who will now get to like it's a privilege. Maybe it is. Um sleep under hedges and like
See the
maybe not
world.
have enough food. Yeah, yeah, completely unguarded, other
Hmm.
than Dunk, like again hidden. Like I don't really think that Dunk's going to introduce him as like Prince Aegon everywhere they go. He's just going to be
No.
Egg,
Hmm.
Duncan the Tall's squire. And what
Hmm.
a neat little, because I mean he still comes, like Egg still comes with the mannerisms of a young princeling. And I like
Yeah.
that still. Like
It's
I
a
can see where
really
that's going.
It's a really fun combination because we have Dunk, who's a little bit more naive in the
Mhm.
political what have you in
Mhm.
Westeros, because he's
Yeah.
from Flea Bottom. He doesn't know all the
Right.
sigils, he doesn't know all the names.
Mm-mm.
It's almost like that buddy cop scenario where it's like kind of like an odd couple off
Mhm.
together that are partners and
Ooh,
just kind
yeah.
of like doing stuff together. And I think it's
Mhm.
also a really nice and interesting observation on class because
Mm.
we're seeing so much being determined upon like these really awful princes who are just treating people really poorly. And then we have Egg,
Yeah.
who comes from the same place, but he has this, like you said, opportunity to become a more well rounded
Mhm.
person. And I think
Mhm.
like that's where they fit so nicely. And I mean, despite Dunk being a nobody with no name
Mhm.
and no money and no background, we are putting him in a situation where he could actually achieve great things as long as his honor and his decisions don't put him in the grave.
Right?
Like,
Yeah. Yeah. That's true. That's true. I am already a little bit into the next one and
mhm.
like have not gone any further since we talked about it, but I'm really ready to. There's
Yeah.
like a missing water supply and
Okay,
like
so
stuff.
you've watched all of the Game of Thrones and House of the
Uh-huh.
Dragon. Do you
Mm-hmm.
think that these stories have better potential than the other spin-off, House of the Dragon? Like, knowing what you know
Mm.
now, I mean, do you want to see like terrible, cruel princelings and Dunk the Lunk or foot fetish scenes?
Ew, ew. God, I forgot about that.
No,
Um
that's not the only thing. Do you like the very chaotic, shocking moments of House of the Dragon, or would you rather see something like this that's a little bit more tighter and not as wide arcing? I mean, you can say both, but
Hmm. Well, okay,
personally,
so
I think House
yeah.
of the Dragon is fun. Like it's okay, but it does
Mm-hmm.
tend to rely a lot of shock value and less
Yes.
story,
Yes.
and
Yep.
that's why I like this.
That's what I was thinking is like if you're looking at it from a TV producer's viewpoint, more than
Hmm.
likely they're going to want something with that shock value because I feel as though there's this like idea that because Game of Thrones did so well with its level of shock value, that other shows will as well,
Hmm.
without recognizing that one of the things that so many of us really liked about Game of Thrones was the story. Like
Hmm.
when you cut back on how good the story was, a lot of us liked the show less. And so leaning on that a second time seems kind of foolish. And I think
Hmm.
for me personally, I would like to see something that's more balanced, more story driven, and maybe just a like I mean, maybe just a little tiny bit easier to watch. Like maybe not something that
Hmm.
like makes me feel like I need a shower afterwards, almost after every episode. Like,
Yeah,
wouldn't it be refreshing to give Game of Thrones fans something that's not quite so dark? I don't know. I don't know.
in A Fire and Blood, so it's definitely like built up more for the
Mm-hmm.
television show. Like, it's not explicit that Damon, kills his wife with a rock or
Right.
whatever. Like,
Yeah.
there's the foot thing that's not there. um, Rainy's
What a
coming
weird
up
thing
through
to
the
choose
floor
to add.
and killing a bunch of people. Like,
That
that's
was
not
cool.
in there.
But
Truthfully,
that
and I
was
like that
cool.
one.
I liked that part. That part was cool.
I
I
thought
mean, see,
it was
that's
fun
just
to
it.
watch, but it
Mm-hmm.
didn't make a lot of sense, I guess. I don't know.
It was
Maybe.
entertaining. Like that's just it. There were a lot of pieces that were entertaining, that were grabbing in some ways. I feel like there was an attempt to establish emotional connection to certain characters, especially through like the family building, changing, breaking down kind of thing. But
Yeah, but they
for
also deleted scenes that were so good. Here's the thing. Like,
Mhm.
I loved in the show, like, Bela and her sister. I'm drawing a blank on the name. But in Fire and Blood and House of the Dragon, there's no real good characters. Like, morally good. Like we've got a lot of
Mhm.
gray characters, but there's not really someone that I'm like, "Oh, I'm rooting for you." And maybe Helena, like the younger
The
sister
younger
from
daughter or
the
yes,
younger daughter
yeah,
from
Alicent, right?
the Alicent, yeah. And then the girl Damon's daughters are really sweet, but it's like we don't really
Mhm.
get much time with them. So I think
Mm-mm.
with the Dunk and Egg novellas, like
Mhm.
Dunk is thoroughly entertaining. He's
Mhm.
comedic in a way. Like he's
Mhm.
always kind of talking down on himself. He's like, "Dunk, you lunk, thick as a castle
Dunk
wall."
the
Like,
luck. Yes.
yes, and it's entertaining, but it's sweet and it's funny, but there's still this bloodshed and darkness and grittiness that George R. R. Martin does so well. And I think
Mhm.
too, like it's a story. It's not something more
Mhm.
like the plot points of a history book. So it wouldn't be
Mhm.
as hard to adapt. And they don't
Mm-hmm.
need to spend a ton of the budget on dragons because there are no dragons. That
Yeah, I
might
was
be
actually
a
like,
that might be two thumbs down for some people, but
that was one of the things I was thinking is why this would not do as well as a TV show is there are no dragons. Like for me, I'm okay with it. Like the dragons were fun, but I don't need dragons for a good fantasy story. Like I'm sure there's plenty in here to keep me entertained.
yeah, agreed. Agreed.
Yeah.
Should we wrap it
Yeah.
up? And
Yeah. Room for it.
thanks for watching. If you liked this, subscribe to the channel because we will be doing more of these. And if you want to see it,
Mm-hmm.
you know where to find me. And we will see you then.